third sum. Sizer. Outline the criteria in IAS 38 intangible assets for recognition of an intangible asset and discuss whether these are consistent with the conceptual framework. So ये जो है it is not related to the question or the paragraph. तो ये एक random question है. So outline करना है criteria of intangible assets. तो सबसे पहली बात तो intangible है. According to IAS 38, an intangible asset is a identifiable non-monetary asset without any physical substance. The examples of these intangible assets are goodwill, patents, software rights, etc. According to conceptual framework, uh, asset, uh, an asset is an element that incurs the right that has the rights of receiving economic benefits from a past event, has a present right to receive economic benefits as a result of past event. तो ये conceptual framework बोलता है. तो ये IS 38 intangible assets seems to meet the criteria for conceptual framework when it comes to the definition. Uh, this is because the recognition criteria includes, पहली बात तो the asset should be identifiable, asset should be controlled by the entity, the intangible asset should incur economic benefits to the entity. तो ये तो ये कुछ recognition criteria होते हैं. उसके बाद आउटलाइन क्राइटेरिया, अभी रिकॉग्निशन ऑफ इंटेंजिबल, हाँ अपन ये भी बोल सकते हैं कि इंटरनली जनरेटेड इंटेंजिबल एसेट्स कैन नॉट बी रिकॉग्नाइज्ड इन द फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स बिकॉज देयर वैल्यू कैन नॉट बी डिटरमाइंड. However, those intangible assets that are developed within the that are under the development process can be identified. This is because their value can be determined through development costs. ठीक है. The asset that is being purchased from outside, that that intangible assets value can be recognized in the financial statements. Intangible assets, हाँ intangible assets are measured क्यों बना सकते हैं क्या? Intangible assets are measured using the cost and the revaluation, or the cost or the revaluation model. Under the cost model, these are measured at cost of the intangible asset, less amortization, less impairment. In revaluation model, fair value, less amortization, less impairment. However, there is not an active market available for many of the intangible assets, and thus, as there is not an active market available for many of the intangible assets, these cannot be traded on a standalone basis. So these should be measured at cost only. These intangible assets should be measured at cost only. फिर बाद में रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट के ऊपर भी आ सकते हैं कि द एक्सपेंस. लेकिन देखो ये सिर्फ 5 मार्क के लिए पूछा गया है. अगर इफ वी वांट टू राइट इट देन वी कैन राइट कि एक्सपेंस जो जो रिसर्च लिए इनकर करते हैं वो P&L डेबिट जाता है, और जो नहीं, और देन वो 5 क्राइटेरियाज होते हैं, वो 5 क्राइटेरिया अगर फुलफिल हो रहे हैं देन इट हैज बीन posted to development cost and can be capitalized. That 5 categories include, estimated amount of the cost, whether we have the resources to fulfill the development or complete the development, whether management is committed on completing that asset and a significant reversal is not expected वगैरह वो सब. तो इतनी सारी चीजें अपन बोल सकते हैं. ये रहा. IS 38 intangible assets defines intangible asset as a monetary asset without physical substance. It requires an entity to recognize intangible asset. It is probable that future economic benefits will flow to the entity. The cost can be measured reliably. ये वो 4 recognition criteria थे intangible asset के. Just open it here. ये रहे. ये रहे. Identifiable, controlled by the entity, will generate economic benefits, and cost of the asset can be measured reliably. This requirement applies whether an intangible asset is acquired externally or generated internally. The probability of future economic benefits must be based on reasonable and supportable assumptions about conditions which will exist over the life of the asset. The probability recognition criterion is always considered to be satisfied for intangible assets which are acquired separately or in business combination. If the recognition criteria are not met, IAS 38 requires expenditure to expensed to be expensed when it is incurred. ठीक है। ये वो उन्होंने छोटे से इसमें बोल दिया कि वो डेवलपमेंट और इन सब चीजों के बारे में बोल दिया। तो ये देखो, according to conceptual framework, items are only recognized if they meet the definition of the element. The definition of asset is a present economic resource controlled by the entity as a result of past event. मैंने शायद बोला present right to receive economic benefits, but ठीक है, a present economic resource controlled by the entity as a result of past event. This does not this does not mean that all items meeting the definition of an element are recognized, and an element is only recognized if the recognition provides users with useful financial information. In other words, recognition must provide relevant information and faithful representation of asset or liability and resulting income and expenses or mere or equity movements. Recognition might not provide relevant information if there is uncertainty over the existence of the element or if there is low probability of an outflow of economic resources. Recognition of an element might not provide a faithful representation if there is very high degree of measurement uncertainty. Consistency. Okay, I had no idea about this, the consistency part. It can be seen that recognition criteria in conceptual framework and IS 38 are different. This is because the recognition criteria in IS 38 were based on previous versions of conceptual framework and have not been updated to reflect 18th. Okay. Both IAS 38 and conceptual framework attempt to ensure that financial statements provide information that meets the qualitative characteristics of useful information, but do this in different ways. IAS 38 uses practical filters of probability, reliability to exclude information that will not be useful. In contrast, conceptual framework differs directly to the qualitative characteristics and provides guidance on how to apply. The conceptual framework does not override IAS 38. The conceptual framework is only applied by preparers of financial statements when no standard applies to a particular transaction. The transaction involving intangible assets fall within the scope of IAS 38, and so recognition criteria is standard will be applied. Okay, this entire part of consistency, I don't think it is genuinely important. वे तो 5 मार्क के लिए है, इतने में मेरे तक काम हो जाएगा. बट वी कैन ऑल्सो इंक्लूड कॉन्सेप्चुअल फ्रेमवर्क के अंडर कि हमने रेलेवेंस और फेथफुल रिप्रेजेंटेशन को एक्सप्लेन करना इन डिटेल, एंड देन ऑल्सो एक्सप्लेनिंग द qualitative characteristics which are understandability, timeliness, verifiability, timeliness, verifiability, understandability and comparability. ठीक है, तो ये 4 चीजों के बारे में एक्सप्लेन करना इंपॉर्टेंट बन जाएगा. Discuss the implication of for Skizer's financial statements for both the years ended 31st of August 17 and 18. If the recognition criteria in IS 38 for an intangible asset were to meet the regards in stakeholders in development projects above, your answer should also briefly consider the implications if the recognition criteria were not met. ओ, तो ये जो मैं डेवलपमेंट और रिसर्च के बारे में ऊपर बोल रहा था, दिस वुड एक्चुअली कम बिलो इन पार्ट बी और पार्ट 2. तो प्रोसीड्स फ्रॉम सेल और डेवलपमेंट, ये थर्ड क्वेश्चन है, मुझे लगता है ये इस पैराग्राफ का है, एंड सेकंड क्वेश्चन है ये इस पैराग्राफ का है. स्केट्स स्केट्स के बारे में ही बोलना है ना, स्केट्स डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट. हाँ, रिगार्ड्स टू स्केट्स, स्टेक्स इन डेवलपमेंट. हाँ. Skizer is a pharmaceutical company which develops new products with other pharmaceutical companies that have the appropriate production facilities. Stakes in development project. When Skizer acquire a stake in development project, it makes an initial payment to other pharmaceutical company. It then makes a series of further stage payments until the product development is complete and it has been approved by the authorities. In the financial statements for the year ended 31st of August 17, Skizer has treated the different stakes in the development project as separate intangible assets because the anticipated future economics related to Skizer ownership of the product rights. However, in the year 31st of August 18, okay, the directors of Kaiser decided that all such intangible assets were to be expensed as research and development costs, as as they were unsure as to whether the payment should have been initially recognized as intangible assets. This write-off was treated as a change in accounting estimate. First of all, no, it is a change in accounting policy. ठीक है? ठीक है, तो सबसे पहले तो हमको उनको बताना पड़ेगा कि IS 8 के अंडर रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट कॉस्ट को कैसे मेजर किया जाता है. अकॉर्डिंग टू IS 8, इंटेंजिबल एसेट्स, when there is research and development being conducted on a particular project, then all the expenses that have been incurred on the research should be expensed to profit or loss. Research means detailed study about a particular topic that has been conducted before the development stage has arisen. And development of a project means means working on the initial findings of the research, working on the findings that were found during the initial research stage. ऐसा, the cost incurred on development of the project can be capitalized um, if and only if the criterias are if certain criterias are met. Then there are five criterias. पहला है, the future economic benefits will flow to the entity. The project is technically feasible. Um, the management is committed on completing the project. और क्या था? Probable economic benefits मैंने बोल दिया. Management is committed on completing the project. Project is technically feasible. Uh, we have the available resources to complete the project, and all the expenses that have been incurred can be measured reliably. यहाँ पे ना वो क्राइटेरिया दिया, मैं यहाँ पे क्राइटेरिया का पेज खोल लेता हूँ. ये देखो, project is technically feasible and intends to complete the project. Intangible assets will generate future economic benefits, adequate resources to complete the project, and reliable measure of expenditure on the project. तो ये क्राइटेरिया मेट होना चाहिए. अगर ये क्राइटेरिया मेट होता है तो ही अकॉर्डिंग टू IAS 38 वी कैन कैपिटलाइज द डेवलपमेंट कॉस्ट. So, when Skizer acquires a stake in a development project, it made an initial payment to other pharmaceutical company. It makes a series of further payments until the product development is complete and been approved by the authorities. In the financial statements for the year ended 31st of August 17, Skizer has treated the different stakes in development project as separate intangible assets because it anticipated future economic benefits related to Skizer's ownership of the product rights. That means Kaiser thought कि फ्यूचर इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट्स उसको मिलने वाले हैं फ्यूचर में. तो अगर उसको प्रॉफिटेबल वो लग रहा था तो उसने अपना वो कैपिटलाइज कर दिया डेवलपमेंट कॉस्ट को, विच इज गुड, फेयर इनफ. हाउएवर हाउएवर on 31st of August 2018, the directors of Kaiser decided that all such intangible assets were to be expensed as research and development costs, as they were unsure as to whether the payment should have been initially recognized as intangible assets. Uh, due to certain Kaiser did not have knowledge about the capitalization criteria and might have ignored certain points, which led to them expensing the research and development cost in profit and loss rather than capitalizing it. Now, this treatment they had accounted for as an change in accounting estimate. However, in accordance with IAS 8, accounting policies, changes in accounting estimates and errors. Nee, accounting estimates. I think it was estimates, no? Let me just check if my order is correct. नंबर सही था वो. मैंने पहले पॉलिसीज बोला था ना, हाँ बराबर बोला मैंने. चेंजेस इन अकाउंटिंग, मतलब अकाउंटिंग पॉलिसीज, चेंजेस इन अकाउंटिंग एस्टिमेट्स एंड देन एरर्स, ये मैंने ऑर्डर पहले बोला था. और तो सबसे पहले तो ये एस्टिमेट नहीं है, ये पॉलिसी है. सो व्हेन इट इज पॉलिसी, द चेंजेस an accounting policy should be applied retrospectively. That is, if the if Skyzer has changed this presentation on 31st of August 18, or in the financial year 31st of August 18, then it should also change this presentation on 31st of August 17, because then it will be in line with the conceptual framework's qualitative measure, which is comparability. ठीक है, तो ये अपन बोल देंगे। आई थिंक 5 मार्क्स में हमने बहुत सारी सारी चीजें बोली हैं, एंड हम लोग कॉपी पेस्ट करने वाली हैं बहुत सारी चीजें। वी हैव टू कॉपी पेस्ट ऑल्सो फ्रॉम द क्वेश्चन। ये रहा। Skizer should have assessed whether the recognition criteria in IAS 38 were met at the time the entity capitalized the intangible assets. If the recognition criteria were met, then it was not appropriate to de-recognize the intangible assets. According to IAS 38, an intangible asset should be de-recognized on the disposal or when no future economic benefits are expected from its use or disposal. If there were any doubts regarding the recoverability of the intangible asset, then Skyzer should have assessed whether the intangible assets would be impaired. Oh, मैंने impairment नहीं बोला, but it's okay. Skyzer should have assessed whether the intangible asset would have been impaired. IS 36 impairment of assets would be used to determine whether an intangible asset is impaired. Further, the reclassification of intangible assets to research and development cost does not constitute a change in accounting estimate. Exactly. IAS 38 accounting policy changes in accounting estimates and errors states that a change in accounting estimate is an adjustment of the carrying amount of an asset or liability or related expense resulting from reassessing the expected future benefits and obligations associated with the asset or liability. The cost of the stakes in the development project can be determined and will not have been estimated. Implications of recognition criteria were not met. If it is believed that the transactions never met the recognition criteria in IS 38, then Skizer would have recognized retrospectively a correction of an error in accordance with IS 8. तो ये तो बेसिकली IS 8 में एस्टिमेट के अकॉर्डिंग नहीं जाना चाहिए था, अकाउंटिंग पॉलिसी के अकॉर्डिंग जाना चाहिए था। ठीक है, या फिर एरर कि मतलब हमने गलत तरीके से उसको प्रेजेंट किया, तो अभी हम उस चीज को करेक्ट करेंगे ऐसा। फिर आता है सेल ऑफ डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट। डिस्कस वेदर द प्रोसीड्स ऑफ सेल ऑफ डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट अबाउ should be treated as revenue in the financial statements for the year ended 31st of August 18. On 1st of September 16, Skizer acquired a development project as a part of the business combination and correctly recognized the project as an intangible asset. However, in the financial statements to 31st of August 17, Skizer recognized an impairment loss for the full amount of the Skizer recognized impairment loss of full amount of the intangible asset because the uncertainty surrounding the completion of the project. Okay, during the year end 31st of August 18, the directors of Skizer judged that it could not complete the project on its own and could not find a suitable entity to jointly develop it. Thus, Skizer decided to sell the project, including all rights and future development. Skizer succeeded in selling the project, and as the project had nil carrying value, it treated the sale proceeds as revenue in the financial statements. The directors of Skyler argued that IFRS 15 revenue from contracts with customers states that revenue should be recognized when control is passed at the point in time. The directors of Skyzer argued that the sale of the rights was part of their business model and the control of the project has passed to the purchaser. Thus, whether sale proceeds of the sale or development project will be treated as revenue in the statement of financial statements for the year ended 31st of August 18. Hmm. 4 मार्क के लिए ही है, ज्यादा नहीं लिखना है। सबसे पहले स्टेप्स लिख देंगे, प्रिंसिपल्स वगैरह। उसके बाद व्हाई नॉट, आई मीन आई एम जस्ट सेइंग कि दिस इज इट्स कैन बी ट्रीटेड एज रेवेन्यू, इट कैन बी ट्रीटेड एज डिस्पोजल। तो आई डोंट थिंक IFRS 15 विल अप्लाई, दिस शुड बी ट्रीटेड एज अ डिस्पोजल ऑफ इंटेंजिबल एसेट, बिकॉज हमने आधा ऑलरेडी बनाया हुआ था, उसके बाद हमने उसको बेच दिया। चेक करते हैं। Revenue is defined in IFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customer as income arising from the company's ordinary activities. There is no indication that Skizer's business model is to sell development projects. Exactly. Skizer's business model is to jointly develop a product, then leave the production to partners. Moreover, if the asset was for sale in the ordinary course of business, then it would have been classified on acquisition as inventory. Skizer recognized an intangible asset and fully impaired the asset, so it cannot argue that it has thereafter been held for sale in the ordinary course of business. Intangible assets are non-current assets. If an asset is held for sale in the ordinary course of business, then as per IAS 1, presentation of financial statements, it is presented as a current asset, most likely as an inventory. Furthermore, IAS 38 prohibits presenting the proceeds from a disposal of an intangible asset as revenue. So it should not be treated as a revenue. बिकॉज सी ये तो हमारा ऑर्डिनरी कोर्स ऑफ बिजनेस में आता ही नहीं है, हमने ये बेचा क्योंकि अब हमें वो लॉस हो रहा था इनकर इसके लिए, बट इट डज नॉट इंक्लूड इन द ordinary course of the business. क्वेश्चन नंबर बी पे जाते हैं. एक्सटर्नल disclosure of information on intangibles is useful only insofar insofar as it is understood that and is relevant to investors. It appears that investors are increasingly interested in and understand disclosures relating to intangibles. A concern is that due to nature of IFRS disclosure requirements, investors may feel that information disclosed has limited usefulness, thereby making comparisons between companies difficult. Many companies spend a huge amount of capital on intangible investment, which is mainly developed within the company and thus may not be reported. Often it is not obvious that intangibles can be valued or even separately identified for accounting purposes. The integrated reporting framework may be one way to solve this problem. Discuss the potential issues which investors may have with accounting for different types of intangible assets acquired in a business combination. So when different types of intangibles are acquired in business combination, the main problem that arises, you can see, is key those intangible assets are not recognized in the separate financial statements of the entity, but are recognized in the consolidated financial statements. ऐसा हो जाता है. Investors are increasingly interested in understanding the disclosures related to intangibles in the business that are acquired during the business combination. The nature of the IFRS disclosure requirements, investors may feel information disclosed has limited usefulness, thereby making combining companies difficult. Many companies spend huge amount of capital on intangible investment, which is mainly developed within the company. ये देखो ये मुझे मिल गया point. Many companies spend a huge amount of capital on intangible investment, which is mainly developed within the company and thus may not be reported in the separate financial statements of the entity. एक single थी, हमने पहले क्या पढ़ा था कि internally generated assets cannot be recognized in the separate financial statements of the entity. But there is one exception to this, and that is IFRS 3 business combinations. Um, and that exception is whether if the intangible asset is not recognized in the separate financial statements of the entity, but it has to be recognized in the consolidated financial statements. हमको उस चीज को consolidated financial statements में कैसे भी करके दिखाना ही है. I'll just open my notes here. IFRS 3 business combination requires that subsidiaries' identifiable net assets at the acquisition date are measured in the consolidated financial statements at the fair value. तो ये दिखाना है. Often it is not obvious that intangibles are valued or even separately identified for accounting purposes. Integrated reporting framework may be one of the reasons to solve this. ठीक है. The accounting choice of policy of cost or evaluation models allowed under IAS 38 tangible intangible assets for intangible assets. ठीक है. So जब there is so whenever there is a choice of accounting policy of cost or evaluation model, um, An entity may choose a cost model or a revaluation model. तो cost model क्या होता है कि cost minus depreciation minus sorry cost minus not depreciation, cost minus amortization because it is intangible assets minus impairment, and same goes for a revaluation model which is fair value minus amortization minus impairment. So what happens is these intangible assets are not, many of the intangible assets are not traded on a standalone basis. So what happens is for these intangible assets, we don't have a active market. And once we don't have an active market for such intangible assets, the fair value determination is very difficult. Answer बड़ा करने के लिए we can also say कि active market means a market where regular transactions take place on a daily basis, और transactions take place on a daily basis. So because of this, हम लोग revaluation model for those assets we cannot use. We cannot use revaluation model on for those assets that don't have an active market, because to determine their fair value is difficult. So we are bound to use the cost model. Uh, However, if the choice of accounting policy is given for cost or evaluation model, if one entity chooses the cost model and the other chooses the revaluation model, then according to conceptual framework, the comparability gets affected because one company cannot be compared with another entity. ऐसा हम बोल देंगे. एंड इन कैपिटलाइजेशन ऑफ डेवलपमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर, ये मैंने बहुत बार ऊपर यहाँ पे ये पॉइंट्स में बताया हुआ है. तो ये रहे वो ये 5 पॉइंट्स जो थे ये मैंने बताया हुआ था ऊपर ही. सो हम लोग क्या करेंगे, व्हाट आई ऑलवेज सजेस्ट इज, जैसे कि मैंने है ना डेवलपमेंट के पॉइंट्स ऊपर वाले आंसर में डाल दिए थे, बराबर है. सो हम लोग कॉपी पेस्ट करेंगे, स्क्रैच बॉक्स में डालेंगे एग्जाम में, और उसी स्क्रैच बॉक्स को यहाँ पर कॉपी पेस्ट करेंगे, तो हमको यहाँ के 7 मार्क्स इजीली मिल जाएंगे. ठीक है. तो ये रहा. देखो, अंडर IFRS 3 बिजनेस कॉम्बिनेशंस, acquired intangible assets must be recognized and measured at fair value if they are separable or arise from other contractual rights. Once recognized, IAS 38 requires intangible assets with finite lives to be amortized over their useful life, and intangible assets with indefinite useful life to be subject for annual impairment review in accordance with IAS 36. यार ये मैंने नहीं बोला. आई एम नॉट एबल टू लाइक ब्रिंग अदर आईएएस विद इन अदर आईएएस. जैसे कि इम्पेयरमेंट है, तो जो इंटेंजिबल एसेट जिनका उनको फाइनाइट लाइफ पता है वो तो एमोर्टाइज करेंगे, तो इनका नहीं पता है, उनको हर साल एनुअल इम्पेयरमेंट रिव्यू उनका होगा. ये मैंने नहीं बोला था. ठीक है. However, it is unlikely that all intangible assets acquired in a business combination will be homogeneous, and investors may feel that there are different types of intangible assets which may be acquired. For example, a patent may only last for a finite period of time and may be thought as having an indefinite future revenue stream. In this case, the amortization of the patent would be logical. However, there are other intangible assets which are gradually replaced by the purchasing entity's own intangible assets. For example, customer lists, and it may make sense to account for these assets within goodwill. In such cases, investors may wish to reverse amortization charges in order to decide whether an amortization charge makes sense. Investors require greater detail about the nature of the identified intangible asset. IFRS standards do not permit different accounting treatment for this distinction. For example, customer list, and it may make sense to account for the assets within goodwill. तो ये देखो, ये जो है ये इन्होंने काफी अच्छा एग्जांपल दिया हुआ है. कस्टमर लिस्ट, and it may make sense to account for these assets within goodwill. In such cases, investors may wish to reverse amortization charges in order to decide whether an amortization charge makes sense. Investors require greater deal of information about the nature of identified assets. तो हमको just to determine the amortization charge उसके nature के बारे में पता होना चाहिए asset के. ठीक है. Issues with choice in accounting policy. IAS 38 requires an entity to choose either the cost model or evaluation model for each class of intangible asset. Under the cost model, after initial recognition, the intangible assets should be carried at cost less accumulated amortization and impairment losses. Under the revaluation model, intangible assets go same revalued amount based on fair value less subsequent amortization and impairment losses. देखो, revaluation model can only be used if there is an active market for the intangible asset. Such active markets are not common for intangible assets. देखो, अगर intangible asset के लिए active market नहीं है तो हम fair value निकालेंगे कहाँ से? ऐसा है वो. If an intangible asset is reported using the cost model, the reported figures for intangible assets such as trademarks may be understated when compared to their fair value. ले तो अगर हम लोग उस कॉस्ट मॉडल यूज करते हैं, सो द रिपोर्टेड फिगर्स शायद हम लोग कम कम भाव पे दिखाए, क्योंकि हम लोग कॉस्ट मॉडल यूज कर रहे हैं इसके लिए. मोर ओवर द एबिलिटी टू चूज द रिवैल्यूएशन मॉडल और कॉस्ट मॉडल मे लिमिट कंपेरेबिलिटी, वो तो अपन ने बोल दिया था. फिर आता है ये कैपिटलाइजेशन ऑफ डेवलपमेंट एक्सपेंडिचर. IAS 38 requires all research costs to be expensed, development costs to be capitalized. ये सब अपन ने बोला था. If an entity cannot distinguish the research phase of an internal project to create an intangible asset from the development phase, the entity treats the expenditure for that project as if it were incurred in the research phase only. मतलब अगर हम लोग डिटरमाइन नहीं कर पा रहे हैं कि भाई रिसर्च और डेवलपमेंट में से कौन सा है एक पर्टिकुलर कॉस्ट, तो हमको उस चीज को रिसर्च में ही डालना है. दिस कॉशियस अप्रोच ensures that assets are not overstated. ये हम क्यों करते हैं? क्योंकि एसेट्स अगर हमने गलती से भी उसको कैपिटलाइज कर तो एसेट्स ओवरस्टेट हो जाएंगे. इसके लिए सो टू नॉट ओवरस्टेट, वी पुट इट इन रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट एज एन एक्सपेंस. रिसर्च एज एन expense. The problem for investors is that companies do not have consistent approach to capitalization. It is often unclear from disclosures how research expenditure was distinguished from development expenditure. It may be that entities allow bias to impact their decision making in this area. Intangible asset disclosure can help analysts understand the innovation capacity of companies. Investors can use the disclosure to identify companies with valuable development assets. On these launch in the market, they should generate economic benefits, potentially increasing investment returns. However, preparers of financial statements are failing to adequately comply with the disclosure requirements of IAS 38, which limits their usefulness. तो इन्होंने क्या बोला है कि इंटेंजिबल एसेट्स का जो डिस्क्लोजर है ये एनालिस्ट को हेल्प कर सकता है इन ऑर्डर टू डिटरमाइन कि भाई कंपनी इनोवेशन अपने अपने बिजनेस में ला रही है कि नहीं ला रही. मतलब कंपनी ऑन द रेगुलर बेसिस कुछ नई चीजें डेवलपमेंट कर रही है नहीं कर रही है, ऐसा. इन्वेस्टर्स कैन यूज द डिस्क्लोजर टू आइडेंटिफाई कंपनीज विद वैल्यूएबल डेवलपमेंट एसेट्स, की कौन सी कंपनी के पास ज्यादा डेवलपमेंट एसेट्स है. ऑन द ऑन दीज लॉन्च इन द मार्केट दे शुड generate economic benefits, potentially increasing investment returns. Obviously, अगर investors उसके ऊपर पैसा डाल रहे हैं तो they should give back the investment returns. And जब भी हम लोग डेवलपमेंट कॉस्ट को कैपिटलाइज करते हैं, हम ये एक चीज देखते हैं कि वो चीज हमें इकोनॉमिक बेनिफिट्स देती है कि नहीं देती है. ठीक है, दैट्स इट. अभी नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन पे आते हैं. डिस्कस वेदर इंटीग्रेटेड रिपोर्टिंग कैन एनहांस द करंट रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट्स फॉर इंटेंजिबल एसेट्स. Integrated reporting. This is where integrated reporting can enhance the current reporting requirements of intangible assets. Obviously, integrated reporting involves, you know, uh, combining all the as much information as possible and disclosing it to the investors. However, it should be taken into consideration कि clutter of information does not take place, कि हम इतनी ज्यादा इंफॉर्मेशन भी नहीं इन्वेस्टर को दे रहे हैं कि मतलब इट्स बिकमिंग मोनोटोनस एंड इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट्स आर बीइंग स्किप्ड. ये चीज का ध्यान रखना पड़ता है. In integrated reporting, not only the financial factors are looked at, but other non-financial factors are also looked at, such as the future of the company or the management's vision towards the company. या मतलब how are the managers looking at the company कि भाई कैसी चलेगी, ऐसा. So all these things should be taken into consideration. Uh, yeah, I think it is good कि integrated reporting होनी चाहिए. Measuring the contribution of intangible assets to future cash flows is fundamental to integrated reporting. This helps explain the gap between the carrying amount of the net assets and the market value. Okay, fine. As set above, organizations are required to recognize intangible assets acquired in a business combination. Consequently, intangible assets are only measured once for this purpose. However, organizations are likely to go further in their integrated report and disclose the impact of on intangible assets as a result of sustainable growth strategies and specific initiatives. मतलब वही जैसे कि आपने बोला फ्यूचर एंड ग्रोथ के ऊपर it is therefore very useful to communicate the value of intangible assets in an integrated report. For example, an entity may decide to disclose assessment of the increase in brand value as a result of corporate social responsibility initiative. Right. हमने जो corporate social responsibility CSR कंपनी को फुलफिल करने रहते हैं तो उससे कई बार ब्रांड की वैल्यू बढ़ जाती है। तो अब ये चीज हम लोग फाइनेंशियल स्टेटमेंट्स में नहीं बता सकते, आईएफआरएस के अंडर ये चीज कहीं पे नहीं डाल सकते। तो एक integrated reporting always helps in disclosing all this information, and this helps in giving information to the investors who are basically lending institutions. Like अगर कोई ऐसे इन्वेस्टर है जो हमें इन्वेस्ट करने वाले हैं, so they may invest at a very low rate, मतलब कम इंटरेस्ट रेट हमको चार्ज करेंगे, कम परसेंटेज हमको डिविडेंड देना पड़ेगा ऐसा। Basically, they might be quite generous towards us rather than they will not look at us as a very risky or organization, as an organization that does not have brand name, brand value as well. So that's it.